Hey, Rising Church, welcome to round 3 of our Grows as we continue in our series through 1 Corinthians and this idea of living in this world but not being of this world. And how do we live in that tension and that confusion and kind of that, sometimes we're just like, I don't even know. And so praying that God would show us where to step, where it is firm and where it is solid, and so we can walk through this life and not take the approach of we just conform and we just blend in with the world and be in and of this world and not just completely pull out of this world and be out and not of this world, but live in the difficulty and the tension and kind of the questioning and the gray area, maybe, if you would say that word, of living in but not of this world. And so today we're coming to chapters 5 and 6. And I got to be honest with you guys, chapters 5 and 6 have a lot of gold when it comes to living in this world, but not being of this world. So much so, in fact, that's what we're going to be talking about on Sunday morning. The next 2 Sundays is a lot of stuff in chapters 5 and 6. And so I'm kind of like, well, what do we talk about when it comes to Groves if we're going to be talking about it on Sunday mornings at quite a bit of length? And so you guys are going to read it and you're going to discuss some of it. And hopefully you're going to come to some maybe conclusions and good ones. And as you kind of try to figure out how to live in but not of, but we're going to save some of that as well for Sunday morning, this coming Sunday and the following Sunday. And so what I want to do is I want to focus in on something that I'm not going to talk about on Sunday morning as we talk about it in Groves. And that's the very beginning of chapter 6. Because in chapter 5, he's going to talk about, hey, we got this case going on in the church. It's not good. And he's actually going to say some very difficult passages like hand this man over to Satan. He's going to say, hey, I wrote to you my previous letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. So he's going to talk about these sexually charged situations, which, is very relatable to us. He's also going to say, he's going to quote them and something that they always say, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. And so we're going to get to all that stuff and you're going to talk about it briefly, but I want to zero in on chapter 6 because I think there's kind of a cool angle, like we talked about this past week. If you kind of look at Acts together with 1 Corinthians, you can kind of paint a deeper picture of some of the stories that are taking place kind of on a sub-layer, if you will, in the Bible. But he says this, if any of you has a dispute with another, do you dare take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? He's like, what? You guys are like suing each other. You're having all these arguments, these disagreements with each other. And instead of figuring out how to work it out, or instead of getting wisdom from somebody within the church who is kind of like, at least agrees with you when it comes to certain things, instead you're going to the courts. You're going to the secular world. He says this in verse 4. It says, therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, do you ask for a ruling from those whose way of life is scorned in the church? He's like, you guys are actually going outside of the church to have them make decisions on behalf of the church because you guys just can't agree. And you guys are arguing with each other. In fact, he goes on in verse 7. He's like, there's all these lawsuits amongst you, which means, if that's the case and you guys are so divided and you're just suing each other left and right and you're disagreeing overall, like you've already been defeated. Like, where's the unity? Where's the willingness to allow somebody to disagree with you and to still love them and be in relationship with them? Even if they've wronged you, he's like, wouldn't you rather be wronged than to just bring all this chaos into the church? Again, a small group of people, maybe 100 people. He's like, why not rather be cheated? Instead, you do wrong and you cheat each other, right? And so it's this idea. It's interesting because in the book of Acts, this is actually ties into what happened in Corinth in the book of Acts. Because if you remember the story, we actually talked about this when we did our Acts series, is that when Paul is in Corinth, in Acts chapter 18, he actually is brought to court. He's brought before the public authorities, the authorities in the city of Corinth, the Romans. He's brought before a Roman judge, and they bring him before them because they have all these accusations against Paul, and they want him out of there. In fact, there was already some conflict that was going on when he first started talking in the synagogue, and they disagree with him. And so finally it reaches a head, and they're like, we need to take this guy to court. And this is what happens in chapter 18, verse 12. It says, while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, that's the whole region, he's the governor basically, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul, and they brought him to the place of judgment. What's really cool about this is on our Footsteps of Paul study tour, we actually went to this courthouse, basically. It's right near the Cardo, the main street going through. And we talked about where you could see the Temple of Aphrodite, and there's just been this marketplace and just all these ideas and all these different, not great things happening. They take them there, and there's actually in Corinth, I think it might be one of the only ones that's been found. There's called the Bema. And the bema is what's called the judgment seat. And so on the judgment seat is where the judge would sit as he's hearing the case. And archaeologists have actually found one in Corinth, and you can go sit on it. And so you can actually be most likely in the place where Paul was being judged, where he's brought before this guy, Gallio, the Jews, taking him to court. And he says, while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment, the bema seat. The judge, this man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. So Paul's about to give his defense and speak up for himself. And just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. He's like, if you were making some case according to Roman law, then yeah, let's talk. But since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things. So literally he's like, I'm not going to hear your case. Like, what are you guys bringing me your stupid arguments for? Go figure it out yourself. If you have a real case, then come to me. You're wasting my time. So he drove them off. Verse 17, then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader. So this guy's kind of the one leading the charge. He's in charge of the synagogue. So he's like, hey, guys, let's make this case against Paul. Let's take him to the proconsul. Let's bring him before the judge so we can get trouble for him. So he drove them off, and then the crowd then turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and they beat him in front of the proconsul, in front of Gallio, and Gallio showed no concern whatsoever. Here's why I love this story, and I think I've talked about this when we did Acts, is that Sosthenes is the synagogue leader. He's the one that's bringing this case. He convinced everybody else, let's go take Paul to court. The proconsul's like, what are you guys doing bringing me this case? Can't you figure it out yourselves? Don't waste my time. So then everybody who came there with Sosthenes turns on Sosthenes, and they start beating him, and Gallio's like, whatever. You guys are a bunch of idiots for bringing me this case anyway. So Sosthenes, who's the leader of the synagogue, gets beat up by his own people. Here's why I love this. This is just a little secret. Sosthenes' name only appears twice in the Bible, and it's in Acts chapter 18, and it's also found in the very first verse of 1 Corinthians. Paul, called to be an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, and our brother Sosthenes. What does that mean? That means Sosthenes is part of writing this letter back to the church in Corinth, which means he is in Ephesus with Paul, and he's called a brother, which means what happened to Sosthenes? Sosthenes ended up becoming a follower of Jesus. He's now with Paul, and he's also writing now back to Corinth. Like, hey, Sosthenes, he's here with me, and he's writing back because Sosthenes was brought to faith in Jesus, I think maybe by Paul's witness to him, which is a cool side story that I think you can assume happened. But Paul is saying, look, people, when you bring these court cases, why are you bringing them before an outsider, before judges? Why are you even making that your witness? You're making us look bad as the church, as followers of Jesus. Isn't there anybody amongst us who can help solve some of these issues so that we don't have to go before the public figures and embarrass ourselves and, disrupt the reputation of Jesus? Can't we figure out how to get along? And I think it's an important question for us. When it comes to conflict, and when it comes to disagreement, and when it comes to disputes within the church, it's like, can we work these things out? Do we have to go to outsiders to kind of help us navigate these things? Or can we sometimes even maybe agree to disagree because we would rather stay united and be one than prove our point and prove our case? When it comes to some things, it's a big deal, as we're going to talk about next Sunday. But in other cases, it's like, hey, can we dispute some of these things? Can we figure some of these things out and work through these things? And I think in a church, if you're really going to be church, which hopefully we can be at Rising Church, we have to figure that out. Even in your growth, there's going to be people in your growth who say stuff that you're like, I don't agree with that whatsoever. It's like, is it okay to agree to disagree without saying we can't meet together and we can't be in fellowship with each other ever again? Where's the line? Where's the tension? How do we live in this world but not be of this world and have a different spirit about us that we can love each other and still agree not to sue each other or to be wronged or to have somebody think falsely of us or whatever? Can we do that? And so something hopefully that for you guys to think about, and you're going to discuss a little bit further. But hopefully we can use maybe this example of Sosthenes as Paul and Sosthenes were reconciled and became team players together, despite the fact that Sosthenes tried to sue Paul, if you will, and take him to court and get him beat up. And yet in the end, they are on the same team, which I think is just a cool story. So have a great week, and we will check back in with you next time.